assume that your communication is the issue is the safest way to do it, because you have no control over their communication or how they receive your communication. You only have control over however you receive and you give. So if I assume I'm the problem, even though that may not be the case, if I assume I'm the problem, then I'm going to do everything I can. If I'm in a position where I'm doing everything I can to reach out to them, even going to their playing field and communicate in their playing field, then on my side, I'll win in communication.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Coffee Break Podcast, where our mission is to share business ideas, practices, and strategies while we enjoy our cup of coffee. Real quick, before we get started, I want to invite you and ask you to share this episode. Somebody that you know is going to get value from this. So go ahead and hit the share icon wherever you're watching this. If you're listening to this on the podcast platform, go ahead and send it as a text message to somebody and recommend that they check out this episode of the podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about barriers to progress. It's going to be worth your time and investment to listen to this. And if you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe. We have over 150 other episodes, tons of information for you to follow. And on top of that, just for you, our subscribers, we have a brand new episode every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Only for the subscribers. If you're not a subscriber, you won't get it. Brand new episode every morning, every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. And we want you to be a part of it, so make sure you subscribe so that you can get all the latest information. You can find out more by visiting our podcast page, Loc-Doc.net/podcast. Make sure you get there. All of the links to the subscription platforms are there for you. Now, what we're going to be talking about today, barriers to progress. Our very own Sam Gray is joining me for conversation today, and as always, it's a blast. Even more so that we've integrated some little spice to the conversation by integrating some of our culture index and personality assessments into the conversation. That's what we're going to be talking about today, how you can get together and grow and drive progress even when you have differences of opinion. I know you've dealt with that before. That's the topic of conversation today. So grab a cup of coffee and get ready for this conversation.
We got so much to say. We got a podcast to make. We're sipping on lattes, and it's time for a coffee break. It's time for a coffee break. Oh, yeah.
Hey, welcome to the podcast today. This is going to be kind of like a old school throwback. Okay, when we first started the podcast a couple of years ago, which actually we're right at like 2 years, maybe 3. I don't even know. Anyways, a couple of years ago when we started the podcast, we had conversations about this. So this conversation is going to have a lot of what maybe I would consider to be some family business, right? We're going to talk about some of the stuff we've been working on in our organization. And really from a practical sense. So we'll break down some of that and what we're talking about. But the topic that we're going to be addressing really is barriers to progress. So I think within any organization, and there's a sign over my shoulder, I believe, that says always improving. And that's
Somewhere over there.
That's a kind of a mantra that we work off of. And as a matter of fact, actually, I have a cuff that I wear every day, and it says always improving on it as a mental and physical reminder that we want to constantly be working towards progress. But there are barriers to that, especially when you have a group of people, right? So progress for you is different than progress for me, and how we approach it and navigate through it are completely different. And I think this is going to be, we were just chatting about this a little bit before we started recording, and I intend for this to be helpful and beneficial for our listeners from a sense of understanding maybe frustration that they could be dealing with within their organization or within somebody that they're constantly communicating with and trying maybe to make progress, but they keep feeling like it's failing.
Right.
And let's talk a little bit about why that would be the case. Yeah. So let's set a little bit of a baseline, okay? For years, within our organization, we have used personality assessments to understand people. At the beginning of 2021, we went hardcore in with a platform called Culture Index, which is a significantly different scientific method for understanding how you communicate, understanding how you see the world. It's like what I and this is definitely not their pitch, but it's to me it's Myers-Briggs, strength assessment, and Enneagram buried into one.
Yeah.
Right. Where the benefits of all those things, you can kind of drag it together. So we've been utilizing this, and one of the things that we did poorly, I guess, with Myers-Briggs is we didn't take the time regularly to talk about what it meant and how it impacted us. Yeah. And so with Culture Index, we've made it a part of our culture, right? It's part of our conversation every day. And so part of the context and the reason that I wanted to set that up is I'm going to imagine through this conversation, we're going to throw reference to that. Right. And I've told people multiple times, hey, this is kind of our new hammer. Everything, this is how we fix everything. But it's so powerful and impactful. And it's changed the way that I think that we all communicate with each other because we now have a different calling card. And as a matter of fact, you have your card with you? Come on now. Come on, Sam.
Oh, yeah. It's in my phone.
Our crack graphics team here put together Culture Index cards, trading cards. There you go. And so it's basically the ability for people to communicate and understand, hey, let me see your card. Let me show you my card. We now have the ability to communicate and understand where our deficiencies are.
Right.
Hopefully I've set that up, an explanation up enough to know. And it's funny because with Sam, he's like, yep, that's fine. Just explain that away. Sam and I share zero traits. We are literally opposite across the board on our trait, with the exception of logic.
Right.
We both have zero empathy.
Right.
Outside of that, we approach things very differently, which, when trying to make progress, can be exponentially amazing or horribly bad because you can hit walls and barriers. So now I've talked enough. What does that mean to you when we say barriers to progress and how we can utilize these types of things to identify it?
And that's like you said, me and you are complete. We share no traits. So on one side, it means that we're always seeing things differently, and therefore we're always have two different perspectives in how things should be done, and even our goals can be two completely different things. But in the same way, all bases are covered in terms of perspective, in terms of there are certain things that I'm good at seeing and I'm good at understanding, and there are certain things that you're better at seeing and better at understanding. There some of it, you typically can see farther down the road than I can, but also I typically can see every little detail that could go wrong better than you could. So when having that conversation, we can either use that to our advantage, or we can allow frustrate each other very, very badly. So that's important to understand. Understand who is across the table from you, but also understanding how you can use that to your benefit.
Okay, so now we've talked a little bit of philosophy. Yep. Let's get practical, because this is something that I have really been working on, is talking very vague and ambiguous and broad, and then not actually realizing what's going on. Yeah. Here recently, we were identifying an area in your department that we felt needed to be improved on. And so you and I were starting to have a conversation about it. And we were just talking about this before we got started. And I applauded you because you've been a part of our team for 8 years now, right? So we've had these types of interactions multiple times. And the typical scenario is, hey, Sam, let's work on this. And I could see that you would get defensive. Now, you may not see it as being defensive. I approach it as being defensive.
Tomato.
And we either battle it out, one of us walks away frustrated, or both of us walk away frustrated, or we both kind of just back away and go, okay, well, maybe this is not a good time. And then we just kind of kick that issue down the road until later.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I think, that's a tough question to answer, but that may just be because of my culture index. Just
throwing you on the spot there.
But I think mostly it's because we get frustrated. We either feel like the other person's never going to see things our way. A lot of it's trust. You know, trust is huge, and we play a part in both other people's trust of us, but Also, we have a part in how much we can allow ourselves to trust others. Yeah. So I think that's a huge part is making sure that relationship, like, when I do get defensive about things, which is a lot, I also have to step back for a second and understand that you're not my enemy. We're both on the same team trying to accomplish a goal. Now, maybe you're wrong in some areas, and I just need to figure out how to show you that. but you're not my enemy. So, basically not shutting down a certain path because I disagree with it. Yep. Being open-minded. And understanding that everyone in this company, and one of the things that we were talking about earlier is like one thing I've learned is the greatest idea. If you look at the greatest things I've made progress in my department, yep. in the purchasing department. They all came from people who knew nothing about purchasing. The idea we had in the warehouse to maximize space came from Luke Hansen, who was an access control project engineer, and we were setting up shelves a specific way, and he just stood there and we're like, why are you setting them up that way? Why don't you just set them up this way? And we're like, what? Oh my gosh, that's amazing. And so like that kind of taught me too is that you are actually everyone in their own realm is very close-minded. They have a specific lens that they put on that forces them to see things in a specific way, and that comes out of personality, that comes out of experience, that comes out of a lack of trust. But other people ultimately see things in a different way than you, and that is a strength for them. There are weaknesses involved. So, but understanding that you, having done things the way you have done for however long, will never be able to see things the way someone coming in fresh out the gate. So it is easy to shut those people out because they don't know anything about what you do. But actually, that could be the one thing that you're missing is that you see things too much the way you've always done them.
Well, not to go too culture index on you,
sure.
But and we probably should get royalties for talking about culture index so much. But part of the reason for that, everything that you just said is one of your ingenuity score. Yeah, you are very focused on the tools that you have at your disposal based off of your experience, and two, your high D side of things, which is saying that things are very black and white, and they're very finite.
This is the book, and this is how we do things.
Correct.
We just need to do it better by this book.
So the big thing on that is, at this point, identifying that, and then when you come into a situation where you may feel like something needs to be fixed, or maybe you don't even see the fact that it needs to be fixed, having somebody that can come in from the outside that has high level of ingenuity and is somebody that's going to be on the lower D side can look at those things. So, the Luke situation that you just mentioned, Luke knowing Luke, he was high ingenuity, right?
Yeah.
So he looks at everything with, hey, let's just go ahead and flip this whole room upside down because we can probably figure out a different way to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
That is opposite of the way that you see things.
Exactly, yeah.
So bringing somebody in with that opposite opinion and understanding that they're not coming in to make your life more difficult, but they actually can work together for improvement, for progress, is ideal.
Yeah, yeah.
So the two things that I wanted to add on to everything that you were just saying there, and maybe not even add on, but just bring to the table, is one of the things that I have taken, and this is from a book that I've read recently from Brene Brown called Dare to Lead. She references, and it's the one of a few things that I took out of this book, and it is assuming positive intent.
Yeah.
Whenever you come into a situation, and especially when it's pointing back to progress, a huge barrier to progress is assuming ill intent. So going back to our example earlier, hey, Sam, here are some things. Let's work on these things. If you approach that conversation that I have ill intent just to be frustrating to you or to make life more complicated, then your defensiveness is going to come out in a completely different way.
Right, yeah.
Because if you're assuming ill intent versus positive intent.
Right,
If you're assuming positive intent, then we go, hey, you know what? Okay, let's unpack this. Maybe the answer is I don't have time to unpack it right now, but let's unpack this because, yes, I agree. We need some improvement. The other component that I've had to learn is on the folks that have the high D structure in our organization is the way that I bring ideas for change or progress to them, I have to be cautious about not to make them feel like I'm attacking the quality of their work.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Because that's one of the factors with people that are in that high D. You have a high level of conformity, which is great, and you follow rules and structure, which is great, and you need those types of people. But they also can be very defensive if you say, hey, you can do this better or you can do this differently. Yeah. Well, no, this is the way that my work is supposed to be done.
Well, we've built this foundation for so long, and you're basically like, hey, let's just bust this up. And but like to us, that is our livelihood.
Correct.
That's literally what we stand on. And you're like, you're just going to take it away.
Yeah.
Which to you is exciting, but to us is terrifying.
So the cool thing about that is that, again, just those two things right there. Whenever you come into a conversation with somebody, and this is kind of where, like, whatever you utilize to understand how people see things, and some people may just pick it up intuitively over time, but regardless, when you're having a conversation with somebody, understanding where they stand on those situations, when we say barriers to progress, that can be an immediate shutdown, right?
Yeah.
If I came in and just said, which I wouldn't do this, but come in there and say, Sam, everything in here is horrible. I can't believe all of this stuff is done this way. We have to throw everything out of the window and start all over again.
Yeah.
Because whatever you've been doing is just not going to work.
Yeah.
Like, that's an immediate shutdown.
Yeah.
You've already started bringing the bricks out to build the wall up, right?
Yeah.
Approaching that differently and saying, hey, here's some areas for progress. When do you have time to work through this? Now that's the problem that I never give people that flexibility.
Exactly.
I just realized that. But anyways,
it's more like, hey, here's some issues. We're doing this right now. What are you doing? Hang up the phone.
That's hilarious, and definitely not intentional. But that can be a barrier to progress if not met with that same understanding.
Sure.
Okay. So, again...
No, but it was funny, though, now that you mentioned that. Yesterday we were talking about something, and then about 20 minutes into the conversation, you're like, were you doing something? Were you in the middle of something? Because I never stopped to check. But anyways, that was very funny.
We understand the frustrations HOA board members and property managers face when deciding the best solution for their HOA and pool security. Should we use a keypad, hand out keys, or install a key card system? Do we even need cameras? These are some of the questions that are difficult to navigate, and we're here to help. At Loc-Doc Security, we've spent over 20 years working with homeowners associations and property managers to find the system that best fits the pool and HOA needs. Camera systems for the front gate or front entrance, key card systems for the pool gates, or simply updating the gate so that it meets safety and code compliance. We like to take the guesswork out of the process to answer any questions and help find the right solution. Our mission is to help you protect your people and your property, and that includes pools. Contact our team today to schedule your free consultation for your community. So we were working through this, trying to work through a situation, understanding that, and through that situation, instead of being vague and ambiguous, we were trying to figure out a better way to, we were identifying some areas in the warehouse that needed to be cleaned up and organized.
Right.
And as we navigated through that conversation, we landed on our return shelf, things that needed to be returned back to vendors or whatever.
Yeah.
So we've now navigated 22 different paths through this conversation, and we land there. And I think the conversation was, what do we need to do to get this fixed? And your response was very definitive. Mm-hmm. What was it? Do you remember? I'll make it up. It was something. Sure. It was something along the lines of, there's no way to fix this. There's too many different variables, and there's no way that we'll ever be able to solve this problem.
Right. To that extent, sure. I'll give you that.
There was a lot of hand waving and stuff in the middle of it.
There were a lot of definitives and hand waving. I'll give you that.
And I would assess some defensiveness.
Sure.
Yeah. And if you were to break it down, so ultimately the progress that was trying to be made was, we need to better manage these resources.
Yeah.
but the approach was, this is bad.
Right. Yeah.
Your response is, well, it's bad because.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's because in my mind, in my even my personality, I already know it's bad. Mm-hmm. So you have given me no new information. You have just added, we're getting rid of it, and I'm like, we're getting rid of your process. So it's just that there were so many variables in my mind, but interestingly enough, we sat down and we started to write those variables down.
Yes.
And as we wrote it down, we created a path, and we realized there weren't that many gray areas. There weren't that many variables. There were a lot of scenarios that fit into very few variables, or they could be approached very few ways. So there was a black and white process, as we actually dug through it. So we just had to approach it from a different medium, get a big whiteboard out and start drawing arrows and squares and circles. And we realized, oh, well, okay, we can actually tackle that. We can do that. We can make that better.
Pointing back to the topic of the conversation of barriers to progress. So I'm just trying to walk through that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I'm also, again, we're talking kind of family business here and sharing this, but with an effort for our listeners and viewers to say, okay, I've experienced that at a certain level. Like I've recognized that this needed to be fixed, and I went to that person and they just totally flipped out on me. Like they totally got defensive. Right. Or, maybe the flip is hey, I understood that this was a problem, but I couldn't figure out a way to solve it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the interesting things when you look at, and again, this is not a pitch for Culture Index, it's just simply the language that we use to to understand these types of things. So we start back with understanding positive intent. So if we both start from that angle, and we both understand, actually, our goal is progress, and our goal is to have a better organization. Our goal is to do these things.
Yeah, and understanding positive intent and understanding that the person approaching you about this issue could have the key to, could potentially give you the best idea you've ever had to that. They may or may not, but if you shut them down, you get nothing. Yeah. So understanding that they have positive, or assuming they have positive intent, understanding they could have the key to all of your issues. Yeah.
And also recognizing, I guess, the brainstorming activity or the process of working through something like that is enjoyable for some people and it's not for others.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Right. If you can, and then when you get to the point and say, hey, again, from an awareness standpoint, we have an issue. It feels overwhelming. I feel like I don't know exactly where to start.
Right.
The natural intent or the natural inclination would be that you kind of take that burden on yourself, right? Yeah. So you just said, I already knew it was a problem. You're not telling me anything new. Yeah. I don't know what the solution is.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. You're not, we've been here.
We've been here. So the next big step is how when someone gets to that point, and again, I'm trying to connect our listeners in, but when we get to that point, how do we identify and recognize, we need to bring somebody in that has these skills, that is maybe an outsider but has a higher ingenuity, that can think outside the box, maybe challenge the process as it is or whatever. Yeah. To come together and say, help us solve this problem versus burdening it over. Because that's a barrier to progress, right?
Yeah.
When you're the only one that's trying, and I've struggled with this a lot as well, in a sense of trying to take on all of taking on a burden of working through all the processes myself. But once I interject other people, interject other people that could point out the failures or point out the things that I've overlooked. Yeah. Once you bring that together, then and having an open mind to walk through it, that is the key to progress.
Yes. Yeah.
But it starts with, one, understanding the key players that you can bring together that have that information, and then two, working at a level of assumed positive intent because people aren't feeling challenged. Yeah. Because that's a natural indication for certain.
But also assuming positive intent, but also not holding anything back, which that's a balance that's hard to keep. And we're learning, we're even learning that. Mm-hmm. But you can only have an open mind if you know that people are going to listen to you, and you're not going to have there's not a detriment to you sharing what is on your mind.
Yeah.
If you don't feel like anyone's going to listen or what you say is going to matter, you won't say any. Or well, certain people won't say anything.
Yeah.
You may say something. I probably won't.
Yeah.
If I'm in a meeting and someone asks questions and I don't feel like what I say will actually affect the room, I'm not going to say a word.
Yeah.
Because that's useless. That's wasteful.
Yeah.
That's not efficient.
Yeah.
So so you have to learn how to be able to have an open mind, but also, again, like we're saying, some people won't receive the information you're giving them the way you think that they will. So we always assume that people hear things the way we say them, but don't assume positive intent, but don't assume that they're taking everything you're saying exactly the way you're saying it or in your mind.
Yeah.
Because you understand exactly what you're saying, but they may not. So being able to have healthy conflict. Conflict is good. Arguing even can be used well, but it also can be, be the actual barrier behind not making progress. So one big part of that is when someone comes to you and says that you stink, says that you suck, then you have to take that in stride and understand, like, they're my team member, even though what they're saying seems like they really don't have an open mind, but they actually see an issue with the way I do things.
Yeah.
And I need to try to understand that. So,
In addition to realizing where you sit on that scale of, does this seem like an area that I would get defensive on, or is this something that I can easily bring you into this conversation to make progress?
Right.
Because just on the opposite side of that, where you may see that as an attack or get into a defensive mode, somebody else you may bring something to another individual that would be on the opposite side of the scale, and they're going to be like, "Oh, I have been struggling with that. Can you help me fix it?"
Yeah.
Like they're gonna embrace it. And,
Right.
Hey, help me figure this out.
Yeah.
Folks on the other side,
Yeah.
nope, this is my territory. Don't touch it. And so I think, moving forward on that, barriers to progress, when we run into those barriers, when we run into those blockers at times, I would venture to say that people would feel like they'll see somebody that is becoming defensive and they'll call them territorial, right?
Yeah.
Well, Sam's just being territorial. This is just his area, and you can't talk to him about anything because he's territorial.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the case. It's just the way that you see things, the way that you approach things is a little defensive, where somebody else, it's just the opposite side of the thing. Realizing that at the point of the conversation can be a game changer.
Right.
The other interesting component that I have, and you and I would both struggle with this a lot, but the other thing that I've become keenly aware of is a bit of lack of empathy or lack of maybe emotional intelligence. I don't know what you would want to refer to it as, but
what are those hippies?
Yeah. When I would walk into a situation like that, I'm full bore in. I'm like, I'm excited. I'm jacked up. I'm ready to get something solved. And it takes me, 20, 30 minutes down this path before I even realize that, the emotional intelligence didn't quite kick in yet, and I didn't even realize that I was coming across wrong. So I'm like, I'm learning and I'm understanding this. And so that was where we were talking about earlier, trying to draw this back to the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah.
Where I came in and I, at a point, sensed that you were becoming a little defensive.
Yep.
And I didn't quite understand why, because I'm coming in here with, we're going to solve the world's problems.
You have the best idea that's ever been.
It's the best idea. I just thought about it.
The coolest thing in the world. You brought it to me, and I'm getting defensive about it. I don't understand.
But then, because again, trying to draw up that a bit of emotional intelligence, and saying, "Oh, hold on a second, Sam's getting a little defensive.
Yeah,
let me fix that first, so that we can make progress." Because very frequently, my lack of understanding there is 2 hours later, going, "Oh, Sam seemed like he was a little agitated. I didn't, and I never recognized it.
And it's funny you say that because I think even today I had a conversation. A tech came and gave me an idea of what he thought was what should be done in this thing, which maybe right, maybe wrong, but we had a conversation about it, and that lack of emotional intelligence kicked in, obviously. But he left, and I realized like I didn't recognize his idea as, I didn't say thank you for giving me feedback. I didn't say, I don't even know, maybe I did or didn't acknowledge that the idea was even remotely good. I just started explaining data to him, which to me is the logical correct response. Is here is a question and this is my answer for that question. But after he left, I'm like, he may never come back to me with the question because I don't even know if I acknowledged that. Like, I wanted him to ask the question.
Yeah.
So, understanding that, like, he may have been like, well, that was useless. That I felt like I just typed in something on a computer and hit enter, and then it responded, and that was useless. The computer is not going to change its mind. So understanding that if you want to be a team, you have to understand I don't see things, like, I see only data, but other people – and that is a detriment to me in some areas. So, being open to that.
So we have to point out your failures regularly.
Yes, correct. So, but that's the thing is like me saying, hey, thank you for that feedback. Even if I don't fully agree with his idea, or I think honestly, most of the data I gave him probably didn't even help the conversation. Sure. It was just data I felt I had to share. And he was probably completely overwhelmed with the data. And so having to understand that, hey, thanks for that feedback, I'll maybe ask questions about it or do that, but I don't have to respond the way I always want to respond.
Can you copy this key? That's a question we get asked about 3,422 times a year. And how can you actually be sure that the person who asked that question is supposed to get a copy of that key? Well, we think you should always know who can copy your keys to your business and your home, because it could be your neighbor, an old employee, a contractor, or even worse, your mother-in-law. At Loc-Doc Security, we believe in protected key systems, so you always know who has a copy of your key. To find out more, visit locdoc.net or stop by our Charlotte location. Loc-Doc Security, helping you protect your people and your property. Didn't you have a nickname at some point called Encyclopedia Sam?
At some point, it was Encyclopedia Gray, yes.
Encyclopedia. Where did that come from?
I thought that you had it because it was Encyclopedia Brown. Is the very smart guy with the book.
Is that
in the books?
I came up with that. That can't be me.
Somebody did. I think maybe somebody came up with it, and then we
built on
latched onto it. Yeah. You marketed it.
I like that.
You were the marketing.
I got to bring that back. I don't know. You just said
I don't think that's necessary.
I just regurgitated all this data, and I was like an encyclopedia, and then it clicked that we had that whole thing from before.
Yeah, encyclopedia. Because it was funny too. Because gray is a color, brown is a color. So.
I see the correlation.
It was clever.
Yeah.
Yes.
Huh.
That's still my contact name in Zach's phone.
Okay, so it was a thing.
Yes, it was a thing.
Interesting. Okay. Dan, who edits this podcast, make sure we get that clip down and send it out to everybody so we can make sure we get that nickname brought back to the
marketing scheme needs to come back to.
Okay, barriers to progress, understanding how people receive information, understand how people are relaying information.
Yep.
Those are major factors. And if you can't identify that, you will struggle with progress.
Yeah.
Because it's either going to feel like you're forcing change down people's throats, or you're going to feel like nothing I say matters and I can't get anything done. So those are both going to just really kill progress.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay. So I want to kind of bring this conversation to a close because I think just in that as a whole, it can be very valuable for anybody that's dealing with those. A couple of tips and tools: Myers-Briggs, Strength Finders, DISC assessment. Yep. Those are all good. Culture Index is a good one. Enneagram can help as well. Understanding how people see things, understanding how people communicate.
Yep.
It's getting that, like, one of the things, and I, kind of piecing all these together, one of the things that has stuck out to me a few years ago, I had an opportunity to visit Ramsey Solutions in Tennessee, and they're really big on the DISC, D-I-S-C thing,
Right.
which if you walk around their office, they all outside of their offices or at their cubicle or wherever they're at, they have their DISC profile.
Really?
Yeah. So when you approach it, it's hard for us to do that here because not everybody has a cubicle or whatever. So that's why we did the.
Well, you remember when we did the retreat?
Yeah.
We all got like.
Yeah, the Myers-Briggs.
Yeah, we did our Myers-Briggs, and we all got little placards to put in front of our, as we discussed these things.
And it changes the conversation.
Yeah.
Because we can now say, well, this is why Sam is frustrating.
So.
Yeah.
This is why Sam is frustrating me. Let me.
But anyway, I guess go back to is those are some tools that I would definitely recommend because it's going to help with communication.
Yep.
It's going to help understand that and get some clarity across your team. If you take it and then embrace it and fold it into your culture, now it changes the conversation.
Yeah.
The big takeaways that I've gotten is when you bring an idea to somebody or you bring a fix with somebody, how are they going to receive it?
Yep.
And secondly, the really, I think the powerful thing that I've learned in the last 6 months with this has been realizing my own failures of communication being too vague, trying to communicate to individuals and maybe come across a bit intimidating where I can get them to say yes.
Yep.
Like, what needs to be done, right?
Yep.
And they go, but they don't because I didn't clearly give them where we were going and how to get there.
Right.
But I did convince them to shake their head yes.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing to do there is assume that your communication is the issue is the safest way to do it because you have no control over their communication or how they receive your communication. You only have control over however you receive and you give. So if I assume I'm the problem, even though that may not be the case, if I assume I'm the problem, then I'm going to do everything I can. If I'm in a position where I'm doing everything I can to reach out to them, even going to their playing field and communicate in their playing field, then on my side, I'll win in communication.
Dan said I'll use him as another example for the second time, and I know he enjoys public praise.
Yes.
So the earlier today, because we're recording this on a Wednesday, we had our all-team meeting this morning, and I love verbal communication, hence this podcast and all these things.
Right.
I had to stretch myself to write up a document. Like it was a full-page document. Did you see all the words that were on there?
There was so many words, Chad.
And I was talking to Dan about it, and I said, did this document help communicate the message? And he said the thing is that if it only was effective for people that needed it that way, then it was worth it, right?
Right.
Half of our team,
throw it in the trash.
Yeah, and it's not valuable. But the ones that needed it would have missed the message the other way.
Yeah.
If I would have just verbally communicated.
Yeah. For the record, I loved it.
See, I did it just for you, Sam.
Yep. I knew if there were any questions you were going to spring on me during the meeting, they were right there.
All the answers right there.
Yep. So I could go, okay, thank God.
And see, prior planning prevents poor performance was not even one of the answers on there, but yet it was one of the responses.
Yes, it was. Oh, that was great. That was great.
All right. So thank you very much for joining us today. Always a great conversation.
Yep.
Barriers to progress, a major factor of that is assuming positive intent and working through improving your communication style to impact the other individual rather than forcing them to come to your communication style.
Yep.
Cool. As always, Sam, thank you for joining us. Awesome guest, as always. Takes us back to the old school days where it was just a couple of us sitting in a room and having a conversation about these types of things, how we can get better as an organization and grow. Thank you for joining us today. Again, a reminder, if you haven't already, make sure you share this episode with somebody. They'll get value out of it and they'll thank you for it. They may even send you an Amazon gift card. You never know, so go ahead and share this episode with them. Find out more by visiting our website, locdoc.net/podcast. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next Tuesday morning at 9 a.m.